Is this thing on? Hey, audio levels. Guess what? Prop mic not plugged in. This mic does work. For some reason, it just shorted out in the middle of the show, and for whatever reason, YouTube wouldn't recognize it. But my computer recognized it. So just for the sake of sanity this morning, I'm not plugging it in, but I like having it as a prop. It feels like I'm talking into something. Otherwise, if this isn't here, it's like, where am I talking? Who am I talking to? So I just like having it, So good morning. So I apologize for those that may have watched in replay Tuesday. My mic shorted out. I don't know what happened, but it just shorted out mid-show, and YouTube does not allow you to like switch microphones once your live stream is going, which maybe they do. I just can't figure it out. But as you saw me, if you stuck around, I was trying to play in the settings, and there just wasn't any availability. So I said I was going to do StreamYard, and well, I decided StreamYard takes me a little longer to set up. YouTube, I can just fire it up in no time. StreamYard takes me a little while. So I'll have to like start waking up 5 minutes early if I want to utilize StreamYard. We've got George in the house. What's up, George? Jenny says the only question that matters to start the show, it is Wednesday, and this is the important Wednesday that comes twice a month, recycling day, because it's always overflowing by the time we hit the actual day today. Yes. So fortunately for me, in my memory, I was out and about last night. So it's better for me when I'm out and about, because when I come home, I see neighbors and it's like, oh, hey, the neighbors put their stuff out. So yes, as I pulled in, I made sure I had enough room to get the trash receptacles between the vehicles in the garage and put to the curb. The trash and the recycling is at the curb awaiting the trash guys. So yes, they are at the curb. I picked up 15 boxes of cards yesterday from one of my dealers, the same dealer that I bought 16 from at the last Madison card show. So we met over in Delafield, Wisconsin. Shout out Delafield. So I was running a little early. We had some nasty weather yesterday. So I'm going to talk about Wisconsin drivers again. So we had some nasty weather. It snowed. We actually have like a layer of snow, like measurable snow. The weathermen even said, you're going to have measurable snow on Tuesday. We did. So we had measurable snow. It was snowing throughout the day, but the ground's not cold enough to freeze. I mean, we were in the mid 70s for like a 3 or 4 day stretch just a few days ago. But people act like the roads are glazed with ice. So people don't know how to drive. I mean, I think people in Wisconsin drive worse in rain than they do in like a snowstorm. So I was running some errands. I had a few errands to run before I drove over to the Milwaukee area, and there were just like accidents everywhere. And it wasn't because the roads were slick, it's because of drivers. And I grew up in Illinois, and I don't recall Illinois drivers being this bad as the drivers I experience in Wisconsin. And maybe it's just I grew up in Podunk, Illinois, and there weren't any really big cities around me. So maybe there's more cities that I'm driving to and from. Maybe that's what it is. But speaking of driving, here we go. Soapbox this morning. Speaking of driving, I went to get the mail. I think this was Monday. I went out to my mailbox, and Frank, we haven't had a Frank update in a while. We probably won't get too many Frank updates because it's the winter and we both hibernate. So Frank's pulling out of his garage, and he's got like the entire passenger side of his, and he drives a Buick SUV, just completely bashed in. Like, what? So I wave, and he was pulled up, and I'm like, what happened? So we have a roundabout just like a mile as you're going into town, as you're going into, the city. There's a roundabout, and roundabouts, Wisconsin drivers don't know how to work roundabouts. I don't think Illinois drivers do, because we never really had roundabouts in Illinois. And I think I think roundabouts are kind of like a new wave thing. So this intersection where our roundabout is, Mineral Point Road and Pleasant View Road, or they have letters. Wisconsin also has letters to their highways, not numbers. M, or is it M? Might be M. Anyway, it's Pleasant. I call it Pleasant View. Pleasant View Road and Mineral Point Road. It is the number one most accidents in the entire, I think, the county, in the city of Madison. Number one. And Frank is another statistic, and got T-boned. Frank got T-boned at the roundabout. He's okay, no injuries. Besides, his car is completely bashed in. So Frank's upset because the insurance company's dragging it out. So pray for Frank's Buick. Wisconsin drivers, they just don't know how to drive. And I think the biggest issue I have with Wisconsin drivers is they're too nice. And it's like, so when I first moved here, I don't know if I've ever told this story. When I first moved here, it was kind of like, well, it wasn't sudden, but it was like, I didn't have much time to like find a place. So I had to rent an apartment, and I had to put my house in Illinois on the market and all that BS. So I lived in this apartment near a busy intersection, and I would have to turn left. And like after work, it's busy, and I would have to turn left to get into my apartment parking lot. And it's two lanes on each side. So there would be people like that would stop to let me in, like, oh, come on by. No, you idiot. If I say thank you and start to pull in, there's another lane next to you, and I'm going to get T-boned like Frank. Don't be nice. Just drive. Don't be polite. Polite on the highway is going to get you killed. So that's my soapbox. So I think the reason there were so many fender benders yesterday is people are like, oh, it's 32 degrees. It's like, it was 75 a couple days ago. It's not icy. So I think people were just being too cautious. And that was being overly cautious, I think, is even worse than just driving like a bat out of hell. Anyway, that's my soapbox. So, but I made it safely. Roads were fine. Drove 75, 80 the whole way. It's all interstate. So I picked up the cards. I got there early because I didn't know it was in the late afternoon. So I didn't know if I was going to run into traffic. And I didn't know if I was going to run into like rush hour. So, but I made it. Hell, I was like 40 minutes early. Cruised my way into Delafield. We met at the Subway because we're going to have a little sub sandwich after we loaded the cards. And so I'm early, and I'm like, hey, there's a Walmart right next door. So what did I do? I went to Walmart. They had like it looked like a tornado went through their card section, but there were a few Archives blasters. I did open I did a car rip. I never do car rips because usually I buy blaster boxes like here, and I just drive the 5 minutes home and rip them in the comfort of my rec room. But hey, I'm waiting. I have time to kill. By the way, there's also a Dollar Tree next to the Subway here in Delafield. So I went to the Dollar Tree before I did my car rip to price out envelopes. Envelopes are even more expensive at Dollar Tree than they are at Walmart, FYI. So I did my car rip. I pulled a red foil Luis Gil of the Yankees, numbered out of 50, out of my car rip. So it's a good car rip. So we got the boxes loaded in. There ended up being 15 of them. So I've got more inventory for the Janesville Card Show in 2 weeks, and more inventory for my eBay store, and some of it I'll probably just end up bulking out as well. So speaking of card shows, Madison Card Show this Saturday, Sheraton Hotel, John Nolan Drive, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., 125 tables. I have a couple tables open. It's been a while since I've had, actually today's Wednesday. Usually I'm filled up by Wednesday because a lot of people kind of wait until the week of get tables. So I guess it's not out of the norm to not be sold out at this point. So that's this Saturday, Madison Card Show, Sheraton Hotel. Let's go back into the chat as I digressed on Frank's T-Bone and my trip to Milwaukee. Terry, good morning to you. Paige and Deanie Bean. I saw Andrew made an appearance. I believe, was that your first appearance on Hobby Hotline? I was on the couch, being a couch person. So I had the volume on low. I watched a little, maybe 10 minutes. But I caught some of Andrew's stuff. I dropped a few comments on Hobby Hotline. I'll go back and watch it in totality a little bit later this morning. David, good morning. Jaden, what's happening? John is correct. I do not know audiovisual. And what's sad, it's almost like it's just me being stubborn. So I grew up. Hopefully my microphone doesn't go up because we're just talking all over the place. I grew up, my dad was a gearhead. My dad built the house I grew up in. He created his own plans. He did all of the work. He had a buddy do the electrical who actually was a licensed electrician, but my dad did the plumbing, did the roofing, did all the stuff. I was a little kid when he built the house, so I really wasn't involved. But then when I was in junior high, I was getting close to, turning 16, getting my driver's license. My dad was a gearhead, so he also restored classic vehicles. And so he wanted a project for like my 16th birthday. My dad, I get this gene from my dad. I assume it's a gene, where I just like to do things myself. And so I get that from my father, and he would just get annoyed if I tried to help and like, get me this, and I'd hand him something. No, I'll just do it myself. So it's like, okay, cool. I'm going to go inside and watch sports. So I get that from my dad. So we bought a Fiat Spider convertible. Well, he did. But it was going to be my first car when I turned 16. How cool is that? A Fiat Spider convertible when you're 16. I probably would have T-boned somebody if we would have gone through with it. So my dad buys the Fiat Spider. It's a project car. We buy parts for it. We had to order, I've talked about this. We had to order parts from Georgia, Bayless, Georgia. We bought a second parts car. That's when I learned the art of negotiation. My dad tells the guy he was trying to get a better deal, and he goes, well, we're looking at a car in Brimfield tomorrow. My dad just pulled a town in Illinois that was far enough away that he assumed the guy wouldn't know who it was. Yeah, we're going to look at one in Brimfield tomorrow. And I'm like, we are? I didn't. My dad's like, shut up, you dumbass. So we got in the truck on our way home, and I'm like, why'd you tell that guy we're going to Brimfield tomorrow? And he's like, it's negotiation. He's like, I wanted to have the upper hand so it would entice him to sell. And we ended up getting that car. We sunk thousands of dollars into it, and it just didn't go. And we ended up selling it, and I ended up driving a Pontiac Sunbird. 89 Pontiac Sunbird was my first car. Could have been what could have been. If a Fiat Spider convertible would have been my first car, because I was an idiot when I was a teenager, I would have probably wrapped it in a telephone pole and wouldn't be talking to you today. So it's probably a good thing that we went Pontiac Sunbird for my 16th birthday. Let's see. Ed, good morning to you. It is great to hear. It's great to be heard. No microphone problems. Fingers crossed. Brian, what's happening? Good morning, BCW. Man, screw them. So I responded. So I was going to wait until I called them out, and I waited. And after the show, I said, I'm just going to cancel my order. And I told the Twitter person, and I told the salesperson on email, just cancel my order. I'm going to do business elsewhere. Crickets. I reached out to another company. Shout out Columbia Hobby, which I've been a big fan of Columbia. In fact, Columbia Hobby has had the same prices. I would buy my penny sleeves from Columbia Hobby at the same price that my whole retail Columbia Hobby was the same price as my wholesale price at BCW. And Columbia Hobby actually had them in stock. That's why I ordered from Columbia. It's like, I'm not spending any more money, and they actually have them in stock. BCW was always back ordered. So shout out to Columbia. I've got all the paperwork filled out, and I will be doing business now with Columbia Hobby. So yeah, I'm just not happy with. I get the business side of it, of what happened with BCW. I understand the business of it because I worked in. I knew exactly when I got that email why I got that email, because I worked in transportation and freight transportation. But I'm pissed off at how it was communicated, or lack of communication. And then they changed they changed all of their verbiage on the website after they send me the email. And they're not straightforward with me about it. So I don't like that shadiness. So enough about that. Boy, it's a Wednesday. It's a Wednesday. It's a bandwagon Wednesday, or soapbox, not bandwagon. It's a soapbox Wednesday. John says StreamYard equals product in hair. YouTube equals hat day. I'm still out of product. I keep forgetting to pick some up. And ironically, I was at Walmart yesterday. I could have picked some up at Walmart yesterday. But instead I buy baseball cards. Effort. Boston Smoke, what's happening? Good morning to you. Johnny Boy Cart says, good morning. In Pennsylvania, we have some snow as well. You might have some more on the way. Good morning, Victor. What's happening? Jenny says, I never care how people drive as long as they aren't drunk and wild. We good. Here's the thing. I do care about how people drive. Like I was telling somebody yesterday, like I don't care about driving in the snow. I trust myself. I don't trust other drivers. That's what I have a problem with when I'm driving in winter weather. I trust my own driving, but I don't trust other people's driving. So I like, that's my, because I know how to drive, and I feel like I'm a good driver, but I don't trust other people, like the people that T-boned Frank. That's what you got to worry about. Frank drives by Braille. Buick SUV, not a sedan. Frank's old man card is hereby revoked. He parks that SUV next to a Corvette. Yeah, Frank has a Corvette in his garage. He used to have I think it was a Charger, a Dodge Charger, like a 69, 67. Now he's got a Vet, and I think it's like a late 80s, early 90s Corvette. Jenny says, only Wisconsin driver I know is the 21-year-old that was out on bail for drunk driving in his SUV into a motorcycle with my cousin on it. Holy crap. And that's Wisconsin has super lax drunk driving penalties. Every week I'll see a news article. Man arrested for his 9th I think it's DWI here. 9th DUI. It's like, what the hell? Brian says, from Omaha, was stationed at Fort Stewart, Georgia in 1980. Snowed that December 1st. Snowed that December 1, a half inch. You should have seen that mess. Yeah, they're not prepared. They're not prepared. Let's see. Max says, maybe not by you, but it's very icy and slippery up here. You're up north. always in wet mixes with the oil built up on the roads. Yeah, it was smooth sailing. I did 75, 80 the entire drive to Milwaukee and back. It was smooth sailing. John said spent a weekend driving in New Jersey. Traffic circles, clover leaves at all intersections, no left-hand turn. It's like trade night at the National. John does car rips and Dutch ovens. Where are we at? Dutch ovens. Where we left off at Dutch ovens. Let's see. Max says, I'm on the same train with polite drivers. Just keep going. But Illinois drivers are second worst in my book. So growing up in Illinois, and now that I've spent time in Wisconsin, Illinois drivers aren't bad. Like even when I go to Illinois, now when you get into Chicago, like the suburbs, it's kind of crazy. Like it's like anti. So in Wisconsin, it's nice. It's like, oh, you go, oh, you go, oh, you go. In Chicago, in the suburbs, it's like, it's me time. It's me time. It's me time. I'm doing 90. So that's Chicago area driving. But once you get downstate and like out in the rural areas, it's not like too nice. It's just enough politeness, politeness to follow the rules of the road and not be too polite and cause accidents. But in Illinois growing up, so Wisconsin talks crap on Illinois. Illinois doesn't talk crap on Wisconsin. We don't care about Wisconsin. Well, and only in the summer when we're vacationing in Wisconsin. But in Illinois, we talk crap on Iowa. And we always talk crap about Iowa drivers. Now, I think Wisconsin drivers are worse than Iowa drivers. And I now live in Wisconsin. And I have a Wisconsin driver's license. I am now a Wisconsin driver. I'm trying to help out I'm trying to balance things out. Good drivers, bad drivers. But Iowa, I don't think they have as bad of drivers. And I think the reason we thought Iowa drivers were bad was because probably much like Wisconsin people get pissed at Illinois license plates all over their state coming to vacation. In Illinois, where I grew up, we had Goods Furniture. And if you grew up anywhere around like northern Illinois, central and northern Illinois, you saw Goods Furniture TV commercials, Mary from Goods. And people would drive in. A lot of Iowans would drive in. So we always saw Iowa license plates because they were going to Goods. Well, when you're going to a place that you're not familiar with, you're probably like, I don't know where I'm going, and you're driving like an idiot. I drive like an idiot sometimes if I don't know where I'm going. I was in Delafield yesterday. I'm sure I looked like an idiot a few times. Nothing new. But when you're not familiar, you drive like an idiot. That's just the way it is. That's the rules of the road. Drive like an idiot when you don't know what you're doing or where you're at. But we called Iowa drivers idiots out wandering around. I'm sorry, Iowa. You're better drivers than Wisconsin. Idiots out wandering around. And it was probably because we only saw Iowa people trying to get to Goods Furniture. Oh, there's those idiots out wandering around looking for the furniture store. Let's see. Max says, but Illinois drivers are second worst in my book. The Minnesota drivers that sit in the left lane going 62 and a 65 are the worst. Most of that I see Wisconsin license plates using the left lane. It's amazing. So I drive I-39 Madison to Rockford like frequently, multiple times a month. And that's like the main artery into it, especially going to the Wisconsin Dells in the summer. But I always, and now fortunately it's a 6-lane interstate, so 3 on each side. But the slow drivers are always in the far left lane. And I probably driving on the interstate, Wisconsin to Illinois, I bet I spend more time passing from the slow lane than the far left lane because Wisconsin drivers just camp out. There's a reason there's those signs on the over the interstate. Camp in the Northwoods, not in the left lane. So that's my observation. Max says people everywhere just always in a hurry and drive the same as if roads are clear when it's snow covered. There's a happy medium. And I do get it. Like, and usually you see somebody driving like 80 and it's 3 inches of snow on the concrete. And then you'll see them in the ditch in 2 miles. But then there's also the people that are driving like 20 in rain It's like the rain's not going to hurt you, or get new tires so you don't hydroplane. Good morning, Zach and Porter in the house. What's happening? Jenny says Minnesota drivers sitting in the left lane. I forget what episode it was, but Bo was super unhappy about them. Wisconsin. Yes, it's Wisconsin drivers that just camp in the left lane. That's why they have the signs. Camp in the Northwoods. Cooter says dads were men then. They wore tool belts then, not shorts. Max says, I've lived here my entire life. The amount of times I passed a Minnesota driver in the left lane outweighs Wisconsin, Illinois 10-1. I need to see actual statistics on this. Not sure you people are ever taught it. That is false. Maybe it's different up north, but down here, Wisconsin drivers camp in the left lane. You're in the Northwoods. They know where to camp, or you're closer to the Northwoods. Down here, down in South Central Wisconsin, they're camping in the left lane, not in the Northwoods. John said, hopefully your dad checked the comps. I think that's probably why we ended up selling the Fiats. He checked the comps, and it's like, oh crap, we're going to sink $12,000 into this car and it's worth $2,000. Let's see. We're going to skip that. Bo's code name at BCW is Karen. It probably is. Let's see. Where are we at? We're going to skip all of the arguments. Let's see. Max talking about BCW sleeves. Let's see. Card Hobbyist says they don't trust your driving either. It's human nature. That's probably true. They think that I'm being too, what's the word I'm looking for? Too carefree, maybe. Andrew says this driver thing can be all solved if we will let the robots take over, like Frank's lawn. Stalker alert. Oh, Frank had a Chevelle. John coming in with the creeper status. The Chevelle. I thought it was a Charger. Huh. See, that's how much I am a gearhead. I am not a gearhead whatsoever. I know my dad was he was a Chevy guy. He was a huge Corvette guy. So I kind of understand like the years of the Corvettes. But when it comes to the other stuff, not so much. Let's see. Fall Creek says, we talk crap about Illinois drivers because we pay to be on their roads, but they don't pay to be on ours. That's a good point. But I'm glad. I'm happy about that because I don't want to pay tolls in Wisconsin. Let's see. Herman, what's happening? Good morning to you, sir. Brian, Iowa drivers are the worst. Council Bluffs. There you go. And Brian is in Omaha. Red Light 34 is in the house. John says, so much judging in the Midwest. What the hell is up with you people? Seem like Syria is more hospitable. Let's see. Card Hobbyist says, and this is a good point. It's like that everywhere, and it increases exponentially the closer you live to a state border. I would absolutely agree with that because in where I grew up in Illinois, we were close to the Iowa border, but we were probably, from the Wisconsin border? It's 2 hours, I would say. 2 hours from the Wisconsin border, and it's far enough to where we weren't pissed off at Wisconsin drivers. We were pissed off at Iowa drivers because it was only 30 minutes. And Indiana was like all the way over there. So Indiana was not even, on the radar. And now that I'm in Wisconsin, I'm an hour from the Illinois border, but I'm like Iowa's way over there and Minnesota's way over there. So we don't even think about Minnesota and Iowa in terms of bad drivers. So Card Hobbyist brings up a great point. Closer you are to the border, that's where you're going to be pissed off at the other state. If you're closer to this state, you're going to be pissed off at them. Hit the like button. Thank you, Red Light 34. If you liked my discussion on why I hate driving, hit the like button. Let's see. Victor says, yesterday's title was very intriguing. Did you ever get to do it before the mic issue? No. That's why we're doing it today. We're going to try it again today. And I'm this microphone shorted, so it's not even plugged in. I'm using the just the regular old laptop for the microphone today. So hopefully that doesn't short out. Let's see. Card Hobbyist says Blue Book equals the Beckett of motor vehicles. There you go. Matt, what's up? Good morning to you. Red lights in Indiana. I have nothing ill to say about Indiana, but I'm going to talk crap on Wisconsin, Illinois, and Iowa. John says, I live within a half an hour of 3 other states. There's blending that everyone is used to. Catching up, Keating is only judgmental on decades, not other states. I'm judgmental on states. And sometimes I'm judgmental on vintage. That's my trigger. Vintage is my trigger. Not so much vintage. I should rephrase that. It's those that say like 1990s can't be vintage. Well, it can't be vintage to you, but it's vintage to somebody. So I think we can all agree vintage was pre-1980, correct? So 1978. Today's terms, that's vintage. Was it vintage in 1980? I think not. So 1990s is not vintage to John, but it is vintage to somebody. BCW was right. It's vintage is a moving stick. Vintage didn't just all of a sudden, it's not like it was created in 1990. I hereby declare 1952 to 1979 vintage. Vintage is a term that's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, and it wasn't just dropped from the sky in 1993 and proclaimed to be this era, and it never evolves from that era. Vintage is always evolving. It's subjective. For John and for myself, 1990s is not vintage. And I've shared the story where I had a younger gentleman at my bargain boxes several months ago asking for vintage basketball. And I said, no, I don't have any vintage basketball. Sorry. But he was like 20 years old. Vintage to him was 1990, 1993. Because that's before he was born. So, and I probably should have like followed up the question with, well, what years are you looking for? Because vintage is subjective. You know, to him, 1990 is vintage. 1995 was probably vintage, but to me, that's not. And so he's like, oh yeah, you have vintage. And he pulls out like a 1991 Fleer Larry Johnson rookie. And I'm like, oh yeah, I have a lot of vintage in there, I guess, if that's what vintage is to you. So that's where it's like vintage to me. No, it's not 1990s, but it is vintage to like a 12-year-old. It's vintage to Porter. It was before he was born. So that's my 2 cents. Let's see. John says, not in the hobby. Vintage is vintage. You're just pissed. Your generation is junk wax era. If the 90s are vintage, let's call the 70s the dinosaur era. Vintage means something that feels old to your age group. Boom. There it is. There it is. Let's see. I think we should just use, since it's so subjective, it's like, well, like classic rock. Like what's classic rock? What's oldies? So maybe vintage in base, because I don't think oldies as like a genre of music. I don't think that's, I mean, I do hear like Elton John if I'm flipping through. There's not too many oldies, like true oldies stations. And I think true oldies is now an actual term for radio stations where the bar doesn't move. It's like, boom, 50s and 60s only. We're the true oldies station. We're not going to play that new stuff from Elton John in 1981. We're going to play the true oldies. So maybe that's something in the hobby, but I hate the term vintage as just in a be all end all. It's only 1952 to 1979, because what was 1978 tops in 1981? I wasn't around. So I asked Cooter and I asked my elders in the house, What did you call 19? Hell, let's make it a 10-year difference. What did you call 1972 tops in 1982? Or what did you call 1979 tops in 1990? Was 79 vintage in 1990? I mean, for me, it was. I mean, hell, I thought 87 tops was vintage in 1990. It was only 3 years old because it looked old, and I wasn't collecting in 1987. So to me, that was vintage. But then it moved as I got older, and it's like, okay, that's not vintage. It's only 5 years old, 6 years old. Max says, it's funny, my two different selling spheres handle vintage completely differently. Cards is gate kept, whereas anything 20 years old plus is vintage in most eBay stuff. And that's kind of how it is in like the antique world. It's like it's always evolving. Where it's like baseball cards, it's like it's this way or no way at all. Zach says, I will once again drop the oldies radio reference. It's a moving target. Vintage Beckett goes through 1980. So it said, so it shall be. But what was it in 1985? It wasn't vintage in 1985. So why? There was a time like where it wasn't vintage. How many years? When did it become vintage? When did 1979 become vintage? 20 years, 30 years, kind of like in antiques. So 1989, at what point does it become vintage? It's not just a word made up for 1952 to 1979. Vintage is as subjective as junk era, even if everyone views vintage as not 90s. And junk wax era it's a little more confined because, you know, some people say, well, the junk wax era is all of the 80s and 90s. And that's kind of when I buy and sell bulk, that's kind of like people ask, and I ask, I don't want 80s and 90s. And it's just kind of all inclusive. But I'll take 80, 81, 82. But once you get into like 83 on into the mid 90s, I don't want it. Let's see. Some don't think 86 is junk wax era until 87. Let's see. Where are we at? John says the hobby definition is a clear delineation. It works as 1981 was a completely different hobby. Zach says, proudly and thanks to good hobby fiends, Porter knows what vintage is. Card Hobbyist says, if your favorite music from high school is now considered oldies or classic, then you yourself are vintage. Yes, and Pearl Jam is now on classic rock. Let's see. Jenny says, some think rookie cards are rookie cards that others don't. It's all a wild game. It's the wild, wild west. Speaking of rookies, my guy, Ethan Roberts, another rookie card. He's in Allen and Ginter. We don't have a checklist. Let's just keep this soapbox rolling, Topps. Topps hasn't released an Allen and Ginter checklist yet. It's out in the wild. I think is today. It's Wednesday, so today's the official release day. But there's been open. I've already bought an Allen and Ginter Ethan Roberts rookie, one pop. Actually, the two Ethan Roberts Allen and Ginter cards that have surfaced on eBay. One was bought by Ethan himself, and the second one I bought. The only two that have populated on eBay thus far. I think he got the hot box rainbow. I just got the base card. So Ethan's in there, and he asked. He goes, how do I know how many cards there are? So I took a screenshot of last year's checklist, and I'm like, it's basically going to be the same as this. And there's like 7 one-of-ones. And so his wallet's going to be busy buying cards for the Ginter rainbow. And he's still looking for a few cards from Topps update. Let's see. Terry says, I'm not old, I'm vintage. Max says, in that case, 40-year-olds are vintage. No, not quite. 40, you have to be 43, right? 43 to be vintage in the baseball card world. 43 is vintage. 1979. I was born in 82, so I'm not vintage yet. Or actually, you know what? I'll never be vintage because I was born in 1982. I'll never be vintage. I made it. Let's see. Jenny says, Keating, he accepts the challenge. He'll meet you at John Nolan Drive, Sheraton Hotel this Saturday, Madison Card Show. Junk Wax era wasn't Junk Wax era when it was happening. That's true. But I think this is why vintage is such a is such I have strong opinions on it, because vintage is an actual, like, it's not like, it's an actual word that's been in use for centuries upon centuries, where junk wax era is not, like, that's just like a made up term because of the overproduction, where it's like, and I understand now we're using junk wax era 2.0 or junk slab era. But that's not like, it's not like, that's a hobby term. Vintage is not a hobby term. Vintage is used in all over the place. I think that's my hot point, heat point. I don't know. That's why it's such a that's why I'm opinionated about vintage, because it's not like just a hobby only term. Junk wax era is a hobby term. Pre-war is like defined. Vintage is not defined. There, that's what I mean. Vintage is not defined. Pre-war is defined. It was, and I guess you can nitpick, is it pre-World War I or pre-World War II or any other war? I guess if you really wanted to, you could extrapolate and say pre-World War II, and shorten it up to pre-war. Junk wax era, not defined. Vintage defined. Does Beckett need to redefine vintage every year? Yeah, I mean, they do an antiquing, right? I'm not in the antique world, but I'm pretty sure antique, like, it's a moving target. Anything that's 30 years old or more, somebody that's in antiquing can probably help me. John says, is Bose 89 Sunbird vintage? Yeah, I guess it's 89. Beckett should just stop using the word vintage. I have many vintage top loaders, but my 89 Sunbird vintage, or my 89 Sunbird is not vintage to me, but it's vintage to a kid, a 16-year-old. He's like, I don't want that vintage Sunbird. But when I was cruising around in 1998, it wasn't vintage. It was just a crappy car that I had to drive around. John says, I have many vintage top loaders. They're yellow. Those Allen and Ginter look really nice. I like those sets. I'm a big Ginter fan. It's not my favorite anymore. I won't buy any hobby boxes, especially now since it's being released in November. I will be on the lookout for Ethan Roberts cards and other Cubs, but it's not something that I'm going to go chase a box or cases or anything like that. John, just to the point that I wanted to get to, which war you can further define. Pre-World War II, I think, is the common definition in the hobby, and we just shorten it to pre-war. Terry says, Bo making me feel old. I graduated at 82. We use raw, a non-hobby term in the hobby. Should we only use that for cards that aren't cooked? Yes. It's defined in the hobby. You slept in the day it was voted, not our problem. Let's see. Jenny wants to know how to scale up the business. Here we are. We're 44 minutes in. Everanium for real. Everything will be vintage eventually. I agree with that. Here we go. I'm on many bad drivers, BCW, and vintage. We're on every soapbox I can think of this morning. So let's get on a soapbox about scaling your baseball card business. So scaling your baseball card, and so I had a big weekend. My numbers are just great on eBay. My numbers have been great on eBay, which is good. I've been killing my goals the last couple weeks. My numbers are all in the green. I skipped Saturday of shipping, and it put me way behind. I'm always behind, but it put me way behind. So I spent like all day Sunday, all day Monday shipping. Had a huge order, several hundred items that went out. And I had a lot of questions, both on Twitter and DMs, asking me how I did it. I'm going to ignore the people. Oh, you've got to sell $5 to make profit. And it's like, okay, I'm not going to explain that. But I will explain how to scale your business up. And I think the most important, we're talking about scaling your baseball card business. Before I go any further, I want to tell you, all things being equal, with the way the card market is right now, if I was still at my previous job and I was doing cards on the side, I would likely, this is anecdotal, so I can't like firmly say yes or no, but I would assume I would not make the decision to go into cards full time. Timing is everything. If I would have waited a year and decided to scale up and do this full time today, as opposed to last September, October, I would not do it. I would not make the jump. I would just keep working for somebody else and making them money. So that's and I think I said that with Ty on one of the bench clear videos, where, you know, all things being equal, I wouldn't do this full time. You know, if it was a year later, just 1 year made that much of a difference, and you're like, well, it sucks. if that's what you say, it sucks. Well, the market is down, you know, from last year, but it's still up from previous years, from 18 and 19. Timing is everything, and what the pandemic allowed me was to scale up and scale up fast. And the biggest piece of advice I would give anybody, and I'm not here to say poo-poo, don't sell cards full time. I think there's an opportunity, and and obviously now that I do this full time, I have a different viewpoint as what I did before. Like before, I'd be like, people would be, I want to open a card shop. I would still say, don't open a card shop. Don't open a brick and mortar. But you can do it from your basement. But 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I would have said, no, there's no way in hell that I would do it, and I wouldn't recommend anybody else to do it. But now my thinking on that has changed because I'm doing it. I'm doing it successfully. I've met several other people within the hobby that do it and have success as well. It can be done. But I would say first, if you're working a desk job, if you're doing something else, whatever it is, and you say, screw this, I don't want to work for the man, I want to go into business for myself and sell baseball cards, treat it like a business. If this is a hobby for you and you're like, this is my hobby and I want to do it full time, don't just quit your job and 2 weeks later start selling cards full time, because you're going to be way behind. Because what's really great about selling cards, especially, you know, using eBay, and I would recommend eBay, or I know people have success on ComC and SportLots. I'm in eBay, my only platform that I use. But I'm not saying other platforms are not good. eBay is best for me. Treat it like a business. And I was talking, Eric is who I bought the cards from yesterday. He's a dealer at my show. And I was telling him about the transition of going full-time into cards. And I treated it like a business when it was just a side hustle, because I think that's the best preparation. If you just decide, like, if you think, I mean, you've got to know your numbers, and then you've got to project them out, and you have to be real with it. And the only way to be real with it is to actually do it and get some experience doing it. And if you can't devote like an extra 20 hours a week on top of your full-time job and your family duties, I would probably not recommend doing it, because you have to